Hi all, I have an interesting over-the-board game from last night. It was played in the Hearts League knockout, the final. It was the final, and it's the final game of the season for me. So it was against Hemel Hempstead. They visited us for this final match to get this cup or not. I was on board 3 against Steve Law. I kicked off with e4. He played e5. I played knight c3, heading for the Vienna game. Knight c6. Now against knight c6, I don't like playing f4. I'd rather play against knight f6 to play f4. And actually that's reflected in Chessbase's live book, actually, that f4 is not so popular here. Bishop c4, like Sparov's been playing recently in the Blitz. Or g3, this is up there, the one I played, g3 instead of f4 here. The problem with f4, I've had this in the past, is black can actually just take this and hold on to the pawn. It can be really annoying. But it's sharp. But I played g3. And Steve Law was up for a sharp game. He played f5, bit controversial. Bit of a like King's Gambit in reverse. I played d3 here. The reason is I've seen Karpov against the Sleeman lines play d3. And a lot of other players play d3. And it seems remarkably, although it looks passive, I think it's like remarkably dangerous for black, this simple move. If you play a move like e takes f5, it is like King's Gambit territory in reverse, where black's getting in the centre, possibly lead in development. And with this semi-open f-file, f2 could be a target later. There could be queens coming in later. It's just dangerous, black giving black the centre. So d3 is a more stable move, keeping control of key squares like d5. And the bonus of it is, if ever black plays this, then you get to eye that d5 square with your queen frontally like that. And there's also this bonus diagonal, which is often fatal for black in many games. Moving the f pawn is often regarded as a very risky idea in these openings. Often black is just getting slaughtered somehow with a tactic on the diagonal. But okay, we have knight f6, bishop g2. Yes, I didn't take the pawn here. Again, d5. I played bishop d2, so I'm keeping a lock and key, like Botvinnik would, on central key squares. So d5, I don't want d5 to happen. Now, after bishop c5, actually my bishop is holding a little bit more d5, and I thought this might be, in this particular position, more palatable to actually consider taking on f5 here, because actually the alternative here, looking at the merits of this particular position, with disregard for what I've said about allowing d5 earlier, this particular position, if I just played a move like knight ge2, I think black can just get a good game, potentially, with this. For example, I'm running into trouble on f2 here. If it wasn't for queen d5 check winning the bishop, well, I'm sort of saying this line in principle, but maybe, you know, black can potentially cause trouble in other ways. I just felt this was the right time here, if ever there was a right time, because also it suddenly occurred to me that I enjoy playing the black side of a King's Gambit, and this is a bit like playing for the light squares. When I'm playing black, I often play like g5, h6, bishop g7, and try and get a grip on the dark squares. Here it's the light squares. So I just want this grip on the light squares, and now I play g4, just holding on to that. And if I've got things like bishop g5, I'm going to be putting more pressure on d5. I think it's because the bishop had really committed to the c5 square that it seems to, you know, make this e takes f5 a lot more effective, because the bishop would have to go wasting a tempo going back to e7 if I pinned. And here, this is an interesting thing. My opponent didn't castle, and indicated later in the post-mortem g5, but g5 reminds me of a romantic era Gambit. Black could just sack the knight. You know, the King's Gambit lines with the knight sack. This is like just really dangerous territory, I thought. You don't want to like play this, because I've got fragmented pawns, I've got king safety issues, I've got development issues. There's compensation, I believe, for the piece. No, I would have simply played bishop g5 with the idea of trying to keep a grip on the light squares. But in any event, my opponent, Steve, he actually played h5. So I was very comfortable at this stage because I'd recognized this is like King's Gambit in reverse, where it's one of my pet lines actually, where I'm clinging on to my f4 pawn, playing bishop g7 in reverse, you know, knight here to here in reverse, and often bishop g4, and it's often about, you know, dark squares in reverse. Here it just seems like a King's Gambit in reverse. I thought, okay, I score heavily in that position with black, and here what's going to happen? Okay, I support the pawn now. I'm not interested in trying to win material or win that knight. He's trying to lure me forward. Nope, I just want to keep a grip on the light squares. Small, modest, less controversial advantages. Just keeping control of key squares. It's less prone to backfire, less ambitious, but less prone to backfire. You can systematically sometimes just accumulate small advantages in a less controversial way, just holding the position together with h3, not going for g5. And now he plays d4. I love being able to play knight e4 because the bishop's not got much scope. Knight takes e4. I've got a nice blockade on e4. Bishop b4 check. Now possibly I can play bishop d2, but I was concerned about my dark squares, and I really like having this bishop in this position. So actually I just moved my king. I just shuffled my king. It's an interesting decision, and in fact the engine does give bishop d2 as viable. I just fancied having the bishop here because there's more like tension in the position. I thought with king f1 I'm going to have things like the bishop coming to g5 later, knight f3 bishop g5 at some point. At some point you've got to be worried about hg here, but I wanted the bishop on the board. I didn't want it swapped off. Also, I think I was looking at this line where hg is potentially annoying. Well, here obviously no, it's not winning a rook because the bishop's on e4, but this could be annoying, this position. Yeah, why allow this? It's like exchanging things off. So to keep more tension in the position, to keep the richness of the position going here, yeah, king f1 plays hg, and again I don't like this idea of allowing this queen to h4 after rook takes, so I take it with my queen, and I know this weakens my pawn chain and that f5 point. Queen f6, but the upside, the g file, I just thought the g file was really good. Now here I do want to grip on that pawn, so I played knight e2 with the idea of potentially knight g3, and I've got bishop g5 in mind. I've got queen g6 if I want the queens off, but here, you know, bishop takes h3 after. So for the moment though, my light square grip strategy is carrying on, just trying to get a grip on the light squares around the position, you know, d5, f5, the g file as well. So bishop e7, if something like rook h4, I think queen g5 is okay, or even bishop g5 there. So bishop e7 keeps control of that g5 square, but now rook g1, I just hit g7, and I thought I was just in a great way. This is a great opening to get. I have great comfort zone because of my reverse knowledge of playing the King's Gambit in reverse, the material grabbing line, where you try and just, you don't usually play for g4, you just try and grip, you know, the squares. It's square gripping strategy. Bishop d7, and I'm taking on g7 here. I mean, if he didn't let this pawn go, I don't know, it just looks very, it's just, I don't know what black's doing. I could get the queens off here. I'm just pawns up. That's a solid pawn up. So he gives up another pawn maybe to try and generate. I was getting a bit worried. Am I falling into a trap here? Is there some evil resources here? Some people started wandering around this board, and I wondered, oh no, what have I missed here? And I was hoping I didn't miss anything that significant. And anyway, he castled. So at least I'm getting the queens off. I'm not surely going to get mated now horribly. I'm getting the queens off. And I establish an outpost rook, even though it can be interrupted. But I was wondering how, because actually here there's a forcing move. If the bishop goes back to e7, I've got f6, possibly. allowing h3 to go, that might be interesting, because this pawn's kind of dangerous. But I don't need to do that. I could just play king g2. I mean, there's other options here, because basically there's no knight e7, is there, if the bishop's taken the e7 square. So anyway, he plays this, so there's still knight e7 in this position, but it's my move. I've got a nice forcing move here. Can you see what white can do here if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, starting from now? Okay, yeah, the forcing with bishop h6. But after rook f7, there's a slight snag here, unfortunately. There looks to be an attractive forcing move, but black's got a sufficient reply here. Can you see the one that I'm thinking of, that black's got a sufficient reply in this position? There looks to be a tasty forcing move. If I give you 5 seconds. Okay, it looks as though bishop d5, but then just here. And that looks sufficient for black. Black's going to be collecting these weakened pawns soon. So, yeah, I kept the bishop on e4 here. But there's the simple rook takes f6, and this should be sufficient for an advantage. This position. In fact, the engine, I think, likes this. With knight g3. I'm just taking here to weaken e5. That e5 pawn. There's no mate here because the knight's covering h1. Whatever, e5's dropping. That's a clear advantage for white. I didn't see this particular line, but it's very, very simple, and I think I would have played it if I had seen that with that clarity. But I had in mind an exotic idea which doesn't quite work actually. Knight g3. My idea, and this wasn't tested, he played actually bishop h4, probably knight e7 again. I can simply do this with a good position because there's f6 here. In this position, it looks okay. If black ever takes this pawn and now moves the knight, I think I'm just better with this because there's no check. The knight and bishop are holding this. This is horrible for black. That pawn is a bit of a menace. And although, okay, it's double pawns, it is still an important extra pawn. It's so close, you know, to the queening square, 2 squares away. It's a dangerous pawn. And here anyway, white's tactically winning this. That pin is lethal. But yeah, that's probably what he was concerned of. And I would have had to do a serious investigation there again of rook f6. But my original idea was more fanciful actually. Against this, my original idea was this. But it doesn't work. I was envisioning like this sort of position where I thought this pawn's really dangerous here, even if check. But I think check to win that knight, then he's actually okay. You know, what's the problem for black here? It doesn't work. Just doesn't work. So that check is really annoying there. There might be another way of playing here. So running into bishop g4, obviously. King e1. Okay, and it's dangerous. I mean, it looks pretty dangerous here. Without the check, this pawn is a menace in this line. You know, f8 queening. So, yeah, that needs to be checked out as well. Knight h5. Is this really actually winning? It needs to be checked out. But okay, I mean, if we don't take the pawn, yeah, this was the idea that I could get bishop d5 in and stuff, and I'm on the bishop here anyway. I can just take this bishop. I mean, I just thought this was no, not here because sorry, I moved the pawn first. But looking at it now, this position, you know, isn't there just something like bishop takes? These pieces are all lined up tactically for munching. Yeah, it was just a fanciful idea, but I hate to admit that was one of the reasons that I thought knight g3 with the option of knight h5. But yeah, a much clearer continuation is just to take on f6 here. Anyway, this didn't happen. Bishop h4 happened instead. But now I've got this is a trade-off theory move. Weakness of the last move trade-offs. What was the bishop covering, if I asked you? And what was my move then? It's weakness of the last move trade-off theory. If you remember that video in particular, trade-off theory. So clearly black wants to take and take on f5, but he's just left a key square. So what do I play if I give you 5 seconds? I just take the key square he's left with bishop g7. He's left g7. And the thing is here, if rook g8, then can you see what white can do here? If I give you 5 seconds. White can actually afford, I think, to take here immediately, because that rook, and then there's this rook. But Steve mentioned just taking here, same thing, just looks a little bit clearer. And just winning a pawn, another pawn, hitting that rook. So that doesn't seem tempting. Here doesn't seem appetizing, particularly. In fact, well, I mean, there's various things here, but f6 is even just letting h3 go. But he actually played his rook to e8. I mean, this is interesting to check out, but I think even f6, because then it looks really dangerous here, this position. I just think this looks very nice for white. But actually, he played his rook here. So what do I play in this position? If I give you 5 seconds now. Yeah, I just hit this rook. Bishop d5. His rooks haven't got too much air, actually, in this position. Yeah. Yeah, the thing is, if bishop takes attacking my rook, I take his protecting my rook. So anyway, there, and now, what do I play? If I give you 5 seconds here. Okay, yeah, I just push forward. I don't mind this back. I treat this as a positional pawn sack. I don't mind this taking a pawn with check, because king e2 now. And here, actually, he resigned. In this position, if we carry on like this, now it's best not to queen here because he'll be taking d5. You know, if I queen here, he'll take on d5. Checking, I actually checked this final position with engine actually, and it seems bishop c4 now. I'm just going to do this winning material. And you might think bishop e7 holds f8, but now rook h1. And this is just crushing, absolutely. Because if the bishop moves now, when does it move, in fact? Well, I'm going to be... It does seem able to put him inferior to g2, but... I'm just going to play things like rook h8. And this is just so dangerous for black. And there's also bishop e6 on the cards here, among other things. That pawn is just an absolute menace in this position. Black looks pretty helpless here. I mean, if he takes, you can see that there's multiple threats now. Bishop e6 and rook g8. The pawn is just, so even though it's like a inferior, you might think a token extra pawn, it's just a killer pawn. It's just so dangerously up there now in nearly queening. This looks absolutely hopeless for black. So yeah, I thought he might play on a bit, but no, he resigned there after king e2. It looks, because my other rook is now in the game. That is a kind of positional pawn set, losing that h3 pawn. The other rook coming into the game here. This pawn increasing in strength. Yeah, so this was the first game result in the 5-board match. Then Tom Villiers drew on board 2. Then I don't know the exact sequence. think we won on another board 4. Then actually our top guy John Piggott actually lost. Roy drew. Then Alex had this tense game, so we needed to draw this final 5th game. We're all watching it with excitement. In time, it's rook and pawn ending. It's so dramatic, the rook and pawn endings. And he had a very dramatic rook and pawn ending. And if he had lost, then they would have tied. But in the event, he won. So we ended up winning with a 2-point gap, 2-point margin. So this game was instrumental for the 5-board match. So to win the Hearts League knockout 2015-16, this was an important game, actually, it seems. Yeah. Phil Myers had a very key win as well. He looked to be getting completely murdered, but his opponent went into a king and pawn ending. He had a huge time advantage, but simplified it to a king and pawn ending, and then just resigned a few moves later, thinking he was in Zugzwang. But actually, there was an amazing resource available. I'll have to show you that in another video. So it was a very dramatic match last night, but I was very happy with this opening. Yeah, he took the risks. I'm usually the one taking the risks in the opening and it backfiring, but I think I was playing more on the positional side here, trying for the small, less controversial advantages and stuff. I don't want to be on the receiving end of romantic era brilliancy that much to win a knight, for example, etc. It's dangerous when you try and win material and when you're playing basically against the King's Gambit in reverse. So anyway, hope you enjoyed that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks so much.